Get up. You do not kneel for people like them. Emma Carter froze beneath the crystal chandeliers of Blackwood Palace, her pale face warming as several nobles stared down at her from the marble steps. She had been carrying folded linens through the royal hall when one careless glance had turned into another reminder of where everyone believed an Omega like her belonged. At the bottom of the steps. Out of sight. Out of importance. Emma lowered her eyes, swallowing the familiar sting of humiliation. But before she could retreat, a palace guard stepped forward and offered his hand. His uniform was plain, his dark hair neatly arranged, and his silver-gray eyes were strangely calm. "Come on," he said quietly. Emma hesitated. No guard had ever spoken to her that way. No noble had ever bothered to help her stand. She placed her hand in his. His grip was steady and respectful, and for one brief second, the noise around her seemed to disappear. "Thank you," she whispered. "You did not deserve that." Emma looked at him. "You could get in trouble for saying that." A faint smile touched his face. "Then I suppose I will have to be careful." She almost smiled back. His name was Ethan, or at least that was what he told her. Emma had no idea that the quiet guard beside her was the Alpha King himself. Ethan Blackwood had entered his own palace without a crown, without royal robes, and without the authority that usually made people lower their voices around him. He wanted to know something simple. Who would people be if they believed he had nothing to offer them? For months, the royal council had urged him to choose a queen from among the noble Omega families. They brought him names, portraits, family histories, and promises of powerful alliances. Ethan had listened, but he had not found what he wanted. He did not want someone who admired the crown. He wanted someone who could see the man beneath it. Then he noticed Emma. Earlier that morning, she had quietly given her breakfast to a tired kitchen maid. Yesterday, she had stayed late to help an elderly servant carry supplies. She never announced what she did. She never looked around to see who was watching. Ethan had been watching. Now Emma turned toward the servants' corridor, still holding the folded linens against her chest. "Why did you help me?" she asked. Ethan followed at a respectful distance. "Because someone should have." She glanced back. "You talk like you are not afraid of anyone." Ethan's expression changed for only a moment. "I have learned that fear is not always a good reason to stay silent." Emma studied him carefully. Something about him felt wrong for an ordinary palace guard. He knew the palace too well. He spoke with quiet authority. Even other guards seemed to notice him when he entered a room. But Emma did not press him. She simply nodded and walked away. Ethan watched her disappear around the corner. Then a royal messenger approached and lowered his head. "Your Majesty, the council is waiting." Ethan's eyes remained on the empty corridor. "I will be there." The messenger bowed and left. Ethan looked once more toward the place where Emma had vanished. He had come to the palace searching for someone who could see beyond his crown. He had not expected to find her on the marble floor, and he certainly had not expected her to be the one person who might change his choice of queen. By the next morning, Emma had almost convinced herself that the strange palace guard from the night before was simply a moment she had misunderstood. Then she saw him standing at the end of the eastern corridor, watching the royal court gather beyond the tall marble doors. Ethan looked ordinary at first glance, dressed in a dark palace guard uniform with silver trim, but there was something about the way he stood that made Emma slow her steps. Other guards moved around him without questioning his presence. One quietly nodded before entering the hall. Another stepped aside as Ethan passed. Emma noticed everything. "You are not an ordinary guard, are you?" she asked. Ethan turned toward her, a faint smile appearing on his face. "What makes you say that? You walk around this palace like you own it." For the first time, Ethan looked almost amused. "Perhaps I know the palace well." Emma folded her arms. "That is not an answer. It is the only one I can give you right now." She studied him, but before she could continue, a bell rang through the palace. The royal council was calling everyone to the great hall. Emma followed the servants inside and immediately noticed the unusual number of nobles gathered near the throne. Rumors moved quietly through the room. The Alpha King was expected to announce the beginning of the queen selection ceremony. Emma felt no excitement. She already knew what such a ceremony meant. The chosen woman would likely come from one of the oldest Omega families, someone raised among wealth, etiquette, and political influence. Someone who belonged beside a throne. Not someone like her. She turned to leave, but a familiar voice stopped her. "Emma." Ethan stood several feet away. "You should stay." She looked at him. "Why?" Because you may be called. Emma almost laughed. That would be impossible. Why? Because I am not what the council wants. Ethan's expression became thoughtful. Perhaps the council does not get to decide everything. Before Emma could answer, the royal advisor stepped forward and announced that every eligible Omega currently serving within the palace would be considered for the queen selection. A wave of surprise moved through the hall. Emma stared toward the throne. Her name could actually be included. She felt nervous, but something else troubled her more. Ethan did not look surprised. You knew, she whispered. He remained silent. You knew this was coming. Ethan looked at her carefully. I knew there was a possibility. How? Because people have started noticing you. Emma shook her head. People like them do not notice people like me. Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice. Maybe that is about to change. A royal messenger entered the hall carrying a sealed letter marked with the royal crest. He walked directly toward Ethan. The messenger lowered his head and handed him the letter without a word. Emma watched closely. Ethan broke the seal and read the message. His expression changed, just slightly. What does it say? Emma asked. Ethan folded the letter and placed it inside his uniform. The queen selection ceremony will begin tonight. Emma's stomach tightened. Tonight. He nodded. Then he looked at her with an expression she could not read. And Emma, your name is on the list. She stared at him in disbelief. Why would they choose me? Ethan held her gaze. That, he said quietly, is exactly what I intend to find out. You should not be here tonight. Emma stopped at the entrance to the royal hall, her fingers tightening around the folded linen in her arms as the nobles turned to stare. She had only come to deliver supplies, yet somehow she had become the center of attention. A few quiet whispers moved through the marble chamber. Omega. Servant. Nobody. Emma lowered her gaze, preparing to leave before the embarrassment became worse. Then a calm voice came from behind her. Get up. You do not kneel for people like them. She looked back and saw the same palace guard from the eastern corridor. Ethan stood several feet away, dressed in a dark uniform with silver trim, his posture unusually composed. Emma had never understood why his presence felt different from the other guards. He walked as though every hallway belonged to him. He spoke as though he had never been afraid of a title. Now he stepped closer and offered his hand. Emma hesitated. I should go. You did nothing wrong. His voice was quiet, but certain. She slowly placed her hand in his. He helped her stand, then released her immediately. The gesture was respectful, simple, almost ordinary. Yet Emma felt something shift inside her. No one had defended her in this hall before. Thank you, she whispered. Ethan studied her expression. You should not have to thank someone for treating you with dignity. Emma looked toward the nobles. That is not how things work here. Ethan's eyes followed hers. Maybe they should. She almost smiled. You speak like someone who has never been afraid of this palace. Ethan gave a faint smile. Perhaps I know the palace better than most. Emma noticed the answer did not quite fit the question. Before she could ask anything else, a royal messenger entered through the far doors and bowed toward Ethan. Your Majesty, the council is waiting. Ethan's expression remained calm, but Emma noticed the messenger had looked directly at him. Then, the man quickly lowered his head and left. Emma frowned. Did he just call you Your Majesty? Ethan paused. For the first time, the confidence in his eyes became something harder to read. You must have heard incorrectly. I do not think I did. He smiled faintly. Then perhaps you should forget what you heard. Emma studied him for another second before turning toward the servants' corridor. She did not see the royal seal hidden beneath his uniform. She did not know that the man standing beside her was Ethan Blackwood, the Alpha King whose future queen was being discussed behind those very doors. Ethan watched her walk away. He had entered his own palace disguised as a guard because he wanted to discover who people truly were when they believed he had no power to reward them. Then he had found Emma. She had helped servants when no one was watching. She had shared what little she had. And now, when she believed he was nothing more than a palace guard, she had still trusted his kindness. Ethan turned toward the council chamber. He knew something had changed. The royal court believed it was choosing a queen. But Ethan had begun to wonder whether he had already found the woman he wanted beside his throne. If you knew who I really was, would you still trust me? Ethan asked quietly. Emma stopped beside the tall eastern window, the moonlight falling across the polished stone floor between them. The question felt heavier than it should have. She turned toward him, studying the palace guard she had met only days before. He had already surprised her more than once. He knew the palace better than most servants. Royal messengers treated him with unusual respect. And now he was asking a question that sounded less like curiosity and more like a warning. "Why would I not trust you?" Emma asked. Ethan looked toward the courtyard below. "Because people often change the moment they learn what someone can give them." Emma folded her hands. "Then maybe you should not tell me." His eyes returned to hers. "Perhaps." A small smile passed between them, but the moment did not last. Footsteps approached from the far end of the corridor. Victoria Langley appeared with two other Omega candidates from noble families. She stopped when she saw Emma standing with Ethan. "You are still here?" Victoria asked. Emma remained calm. "I work here." Victoria glanced at Ethan. "And you are becoming rather comfortable around the guards." Emma said nothing. Ethan's expression stayed neutral, but his eyes sharpened slightly. Victoria continued. "The Queen selection is not a place for someone without a family name." Emma felt the familiar pressure in her chest, but this time she did not lower her head. "The council said every eligible Omega could be considered." Victoria smiled politely. "Being considered is not the same as being chosen." Ethan stepped forward. "Sometimes people are chosen for reasons their families cannot understand." Victoria looked at him with mild irritation. "And what would a palace guard know about choosing a queen?" Ethan paused. For one brief second, Emma thought he might reveal everything. Instead, he simply answered, "More than you think." Victoria left with the other candidates, her footsteps fading down the corridor. Emma looked at Ethan. "You should be careful." "About what?" "People are starting to notice you." Ethan smiled faintly. "So are you." Emma looked away. "You are strange." "I have been told that." The following evening, the Queen's selection ceremony began. The great ballroom filled with nobles, council members, servants, and eligible Omegas. Emma stood at the back in a simple dark blue dress, trying to convince herself that she had no reason to be nervous. One by one, the noble candidates stepped forward. Their names were announced with praise for their families, education, and connections. Then the royal advisor reached the final name. Emma Carter. A hush moved through the ballroom. Emma took one slow breath and walked forward. She could feel every eye following her. At the center of the room, she stopped beneath the crystal chandeliers. Then the great doors opened. The Alpha King entered. Everyone bowed. Emma lowered her head, but when she looked up again, something about the king seemed strangely familiar. His silver-gray eyes met hers for one long second. Her heart stopped. She looked toward the line of palace guards. Ethan was gone. Emma's eyes widened. The king walked toward the throne as the royal advisor turned toward the guard captain. "Your Majesty," the advisor said, "the candidates are ready." The king nodded. Then he spoke clearly enough for the entire hall to hear. "Before we continue, bring me the guard who stood beside Miss Carter." Emma felt the room change around her. Her gaze moved toward the side entrance. Ethan appeared there. He walked slowly into the ballroom, his expression calm. Every step brought him closer to the throne. And with every step, Emma began to understand that the man she had trusted was not who she thought he was. "You were never supposed to see me like this." Ethan's voice carried quietly across the ballroom as he stopped several feet before the throne. Emma could barely breathe. The palace guard she had trusted stood beneath the royal banners, but something about him had changed. His posture was straighter. His expression carried an authority she had never seen before. The captain of the royal guard lowered his head. The council members followed. Even the nobles who had mocked Emma moments earlier were silent. Ethan looked directly at her. Emma. Hearing her name from him felt different now. "Who are you?" she asked. He took a slow breath. Then he reached for the silver clasp at his collar and removed the small guard insignia. He placed it on the table beside the throne. "My name is Ethan Blackwood." A quiet murmur swept through the ballroom. "And I am the Alpha King." Emma stared at him. The answer explained everything. The way the other guards respected him, the royal messenger, the palace knowledge, the strange confidence. Yet knowing the truth did not make the moment easier. "You lied to me," she said softly. Ethan did not defend himself. "I hid the truth." "That is still a lie." He lowered his eyes for a moment. "You are right." Emma looked away, trying to gather her thoughts. She remembered the first time he had helped her stand. He had not known she could offer him anything. He had simply reached out his hand. Or so she had believed. Ethan stepped closer, but stopped at a respectful distance. "I did not disguise myself because I wanted to deceive you." Emma looked back at him. "Then why?" He turned toward the court. Because I needed to know what people were like when they believed I had no power. His gaze moved across the nobles. For months, I have been surrounded by people who praise my title, my family, and my crown. I wanted to meet someone who would see a person before seeing a king. His eyes returned to Emma. Then I met you. Victoria stepped forward. Your Majesty, with respect, that does not explain why she should be queen. Ethan remained calm. It explains exactly why. The room fell silent. Emma helped people when nobody was watching. She treated a palace guard with dignity because she believed he had nothing to offer her. She never asked who I was. She never asked what I could give her. Emma's eyes filled with emotion. But you were testing me. Ethan nodded. At first, he paused. Then I realized I was no longer testing you. I was learning from you. The words settled over the court. The royal advisor stepped forward. Your Majesty, the council has prepared the final selection. Ethan looked at the candidates, then at Emma. I know. The advisor waited. Then whom will you choose? Ethan did not answer immediately. He walked toward Emma and stopped before her. Before anyone else speaks, I want you to hear this. Emma looked at him. I will never choose you because I think you need to be rescued. I will never choose you because I pity you. His voice softened. If I choose you, it will be because I believe you have something this kingdom needs. Emma's heart trembled. Then Ethan turned toward the throne. Bring forward the moon crown. The silver crown was placed on a velvet cushion. Emma stared at it. Ethan looked back at her. But the choice will still be yours. Then I choose you to decide. Emma stared at the moon crown resting on its velvet cushion, her heart caught between disbelief and something she had never allowed herself to feel before. Possibility. Ethan stood several feet away, no longer a palace guard, no longer a stranger hiding behind a uniform. He was the Alpha King, yet for the first time since she had met him, he seemed less powerful than before. He was waiting for her answer. The entire ballroom was waiting too. Emma looked across the court. Victoria stood among the noble candidates, watching silently. The council members waited with carefully controlled expressions. The servants remained near the walls, their faces filled with uncertainty. Emma suddenly realized that everyone had an opinion about what she should do. Everyone except Ethan. He had given the decision back to her. Why me? She asked. Ethan answered without hesitation. Because you never needed an audience to be kind. Emma looked down at the crown. That does not make me prepared to be queen. No, Ethan said. But being willing to learn does. She looked at him again. What if I fail? Then you learn. What if people do not accept me? Ethan's voice became softer. Then you show them who you are. Emma took a slow breath. She remembered every time she had been told that she was too ordinary, too poor, too quiet, or simply not important enough. She had spent years believing those words because they came from people who seemed to know better. But now the crown sat before her, and nobody could choose for her. She stepped toward it. The ballroom became completely silent. Emma reached out and touched the silver crown. A soft glow appeared beneath her fingertips, spreading gently across the metal. Several members of the court exchanged surprised looks. The royal advisor lowered his head. The moon crown recognizes her. Emma's eyes widened. She lifted the crown carefully. It felt lighter than she expected. Ethan watched without moving. He had promised that the choice belonged to her. Now he would honor that promise. Emma turned toward him. If I accept this, I want one thing. Name it. I want to remain myself. Ethan smiled. That is the only version of you I would ever want beside me. Her eyes softened. Then she looked toward the throne. The crown reflected the light from the chandeliers, casting silver patterns across the marble floor. Emma thought about the girl who had entered the palace that morning carrying folded linens, convinced that nobody important would ever notice her. She had been wrong, but not. Because a king had suddenly decided she mattered. She mattered before he ever saw her. Ethan had simply been the first person with the power to make others notice. Emma lifted the moon crown and placed it gently upon her head. The silver light grew warmer, surrounding her without overwhelming the room. She stood straighter. Her expression remained gentle, but something inside her had changed. She was no longer waiting for permission to believe in herself. Ethan approached and stopped beside her. Are you certain? He asked. Emma looked at him and smiled. For the first time, I am. The royal advisor stepped forward and bowed. Your Majesty, your queen has chosen. Ethan looked at Emma, and his voice carried across the hall. Then let the kingdom know her by the truth she has always carried. You do not have to prove yourself to them. Ethan's quiet words followed Emma as she stood beneath the royal banners, the moon crown resting gently on her head. The ceremony had ended, but the court had not yet recovered from what had happened. A woman who had spent years working in the palace had just become queen, while several noble families were still trying to understand how the decision had slipped beyond their control. Emma looked toward the servants gathered near the back of the hall. Some were smiling. Others simply stared, as if they were seeing her for the first time. She knew what they were thinking because she had once thought the same thing. How could someone like her stand beside a king? Ethan stepped closer. Are you all right? Emma nodded. I think so. You do not sound certain. She gave a small smile. I am trying to understand how one evening can change an entire life. Ethan looked toward the throne. Your life did not change because you became queen. Emma glanced at him. Then what changed? People finally decided to notice what was already there. His answer settled quietly between them. Before Emma could respond, Victoria approached. Her expression was no longer openly dismissive. Instead, she looked uncertain. Your Majesty, she said, lowering her head. Emma watched her carefully. Victoria. The noble Omega hesitated. I owe you an apology. Emma did not expect that. For what? For assuming that your lack of status meant you lacked value. Emma could have reminded her of every cruel comment, every dismissive glance, every moment she had been made to feel invisible. Instead, she simply said, Thank you for saying that. Victoria looked surprised. You are not angry. Emma considered the question. I was hurt, but I do not want to spend my life carrying every hurt with me. Ethan watched silently. There was something about Emma's answer that made his expression soften. Later that evening, Emma walked through the eastern corridor alone. The same corridor where Ethan had once stood in his guard uniform. She stopped beside the window where they had spoken about trust. Ethan joined her a moment later, now dressed in his royal coat. Emma looked at him. I still cannot believe you were standing here all this time. Ethan smiled. Neither can I. You seem so comfortable pretending to be a guard. It was easier than being king. Emma raised an eyebrow. You did not look uncomfortable. He laughed softly. That was the point. Emma looked through the window, toward the moonlit gardens. Did you ever worry I would hate you after learning the truth? Ethan was silent for a moment. Yes. Why? Because I cared what you thought of me before I had the right to ask you to care. Emma turned toward him. His honesty surprised her more than his crown ever had. You know, she said. I still remember the first thing you told me. What was it? Get up. Ethan smiled. And you did. Emma touched the edge of her crown. Maybe that was the first time I stopped believing I belonged beneath everyone else. Ethan looked at her with quiet pride. Then perhaps the crown was never the beginning. Emma smiled. Perhaps not. Beyond the windows, the palace bells began to ring. Tomorrow, she would face the kingdom as its queen. Tonight, she simply stood beside the man who had once been a stranger in a guard's uniform. And for the first time, Emma wondered what other secrets the Alpha King had yet to reveal. I still have one truth you do not know. Emma looked at Ethan in the quiet eastern corridor, the moon crown, catching the soft light from the tall windows behind them. His words carried the same calm certainty she had first heard from the palace guard. But now every sentence seemed to hold a deeper meaning. What truth? She asked. Ethan looked toward the empty hallway before answering. I knew your name before the day I helped you in the royal hall. Emma's expression changed. How? A servant told me about you. He explained that an elderly woman named Margaret had once mentioned Emma after seeing her stay late to help carry supplies through the rain. Ethan had remembered the story because it was unusual. People in the palace often wanted to be noticed. Emma seemed to do the opposite. She helped quietly and moved on. So you came looking for me? Emma asked. Ethan nodded. At first, I wanted to know whether the person Margaret described was real. Emma smiled faintly. And she was right. His answer made her look away, suddenly shy despite everything that had happened. That still does not explain why you watched me. Ethan remained honest. I needed to understand what kind of person you were before I made a decision that would affect the entire kingdom. Emma looked at him carefully. You mean choosing a queen? Yes. Then I was part of a test. Ethan's expression softened. At first, Emma folded her arms. And what happened afterward? He took a slow breath. You stopped being a test. The word surprised her. Ethan continued. I began noticing the things you did when you thought no one was watching. You gave your breakfast to a kitchen maid who had missed hers. You helped Margaret with supplies. You defended a young servant when nobody else wanted to speak. Emma shook her head. Those were small things. Small things reveal character. She looked through the window toward the moonlit gardens. I do not know how to be a queen. Neither did every queen before you. Emma smiled. That is not very reassuring. Ethan gave a quiet laugh. Then let me say it differently. You do not need to know everything. You only need to be willing to learn. A bell sounded in the distance, reminding them that the court would gather again the following morning. Emma looked at her reflection in the window. The silver crown still felt unfamiliar. Everyone will expect me to change. They may. What if they expect me to become colder? Ethan shook his head. Then disappoint them. Emma laughed softly for the first time that evening. You make it sound simple. Some things are. He stood beside her, leaving enough space between them for her to feel comfortable. You spent years believing you were less important because other people treated you that way. Do not make the same mistake now just because they suddenly treat you differently. Emma looked at him. And what do you believe? Ethan met her eyes. I believe you were worthy before the crown ever touched your head. Her expression softened. Outside, the moon reflected across the palace gardens. Tomorrow, Emma would stand before the kingdom as its queen. Tonight, she was still learning what it meant to be seen. Then Ethan looked toward the closed doors of the royal council chamber. There is one more thing. Emma raised an eyebrow. Another secret? He smiled. Not a secret. A promise. What promise? Ethan extended his hand, just as he had on the day they first met. Whatever happens tomorrow, you will never have to face the court alone. Emma looked at his hand, then placed hers in it. This time, she did not hesitate. Tomorrow, they would all see the woman they once overlooked. Emma stood beside Ethan beneath the tall windows of Blackwood Palace, her hand resting calmly in his as the first light of morning touched the royal gardens. The moon crown rested above her auburn hair, but she still felt like the same woman who had once walked these halls carrying folded linens. The difference was not the crown. The difference was that she no longer believed the whispers around her. When the great doors opened, the royal court gathered for the formal presentation of the new queen. Emma walked beside Ethan into the grand hall. Nobles bowed. Servants watched from the edges of the room. Some faces showed genuine respect. Others still carried doubt. Emma noticed all of it, but she did not shrink. Ethan glanced toward her. Ready? He asked quietly. Emma took a slow breath. No, a small smile appeared on his face. Good answer. She looked at him. Why? Because anyone who says they are completely ready for something this important probably does not understand it yet. Emma smiled back. Then the royal advisor stepped forward. Before the court and the kingdom, we recognize Emma Carter as Queen of Blackwood. The words echoed beneath the chandeliers. Emma looked across the hall and saw Victoria standing among the noble families. This time, Victoria lowered her head first. Emma returned the gesture. There was no need for triumph. She had already learned that dignity did not require making someone else feel small. Ethan stepped forward. My queen. Emma turned toward him. The title sounded strange, but not frightening anymore. My king. The court grew quiet. Ethan looked toward the assembled nobles. Many of you asked why I chose an Omega without a powerful family name. He paused. The answer is simple. I did not choose Emma because she needed the crown. I chose her because she never needed the crown to show her character. Emma felt her eyes grow warm. Ethan continued. She was kind when nobody important was watching. She remained honest when kindness brought her nothing. She stood beside people who could offer her no advantage. Those qualities existed long before I ever placed a crown near her. Emma looked down for a moment, remembering the marble floor where she had once believed she belonged beneath everyone else. Then she looked back at Ethan. He had not rescued her from that belief. He had simply held out a hand and given her the chance to stand. The royal doors opened to the balcony, revealing the kingdom below. Morning sunlight spread across the rooftops, gardens, and distant hills. Emma and Ethan stepped forward together. The people gathered below looked toward them, and a wave of respectful applause rose through the courtyard. Emma glanced at Ethan. Do you think they will accept me? Some will immediately, he said. Some will need time. And the others? Ethan smiled. They will learn. Emma looked over the kingdom. She knew there would be difficult days. She knew being queen would not erase every old judgment. But she also knew she would never again measure her worth by someone else's opinion. Ethan had entered the palace disguised as a guard because he wanted to discover whether anyone could see beyond the crown. Instead, he had discovered someone who had never needed to see the crown at all. Emma had seen him when he believed he was nobody, and he had seen her long before the kingdom finally did. She turned toward him, her expression peaceful. "You know what I remember most?" Ethan asked. "What?" "The day I told you to get up." Emma smiled. "I remember thinking you were strange." Ethan laughed softly. "And now?" She looked toward the kingdom, then back at the man beside her. "Now I think you were right." The morning sun rose higher over Blackwood Palace. The Omega, once overlooked by everyone, now stood as queen, not because she had become someone else, but because the world had finally learned to see the person she had always been. And beside her stood the Alpha King, who had discovered that true strength was never about being obeyed. It was about knowing when to offer a hand, when to listen, and when to let someone choose their own destiny.